They say islands are supposed to feel like paradise. But what if there was an island where the sun rose over chains, and the ocean wasn't a view, but a warning? Just off the coast of Sydney sits Cockatoo Island, a place once whispered about by sailors, feared by convicts, and avoided by free men. An island where escape was nearly impossible, and survival depended on more than just strength. Because here, the real danger wasn't the guards. It was the island itself. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. They called it Australia's island of crime, but the stories buried in its cliffs go far deeper than the history books ever dared to admit. Tonight, we are going inside. Cockatoo Island wasn't carved by architects. It was carved by the very people imprisoned on it. When the British Empire needed a place to break those they believed were incorrigible, they didn't just build a prison. They chose an island with no fresh water, steep cliffs, and a shoreline surrounded by dangerous currents. A place where the land itself acted as a guard tower. Convicts were ferried in on overcrowded boats, shackled wrist to ankle, not knowing they were being transferred to a landscape harsher than any cell. Here, punishment wasn't a sentence, it was a lifestyle. From sunrise to sunset, prisoners cut through thick sandstone with primitive tools, shaping the very workshops, tunnels, and barracks they would later be locked inside. Every blow of the hammer echoed across the harbour, a reminder that freedom was an ocean away. But physical hardship was only the beginning. Because behind these stone walls, the island developed its own social order, one made of whispered deals, survival alliances, and secrets that still linger in the tunnels today. Most prisons hold adults. Cockatoo Island held boys, some as young as 12. In 1839, part of the island was turned into a reformatory for juvenile offenders. But instead of receiving guidance or rehabilitation, many of these boys found themselves living only meters away from hardened adult convicts. Separated by thin lines of fencing, their lives became a constant collision of innocence and survival. The boys were expected to work, study, and obey, but life on the island taught them something very different. Trust no one. Rely on yourself. Stay invisible. Some of these boys grew up on Cockatoo Island, leaving the mainland only when they were older, but by then, many weren't the same. And some never left at all. Today, historians say the island was a reformatory. But for many boys, it was simply a childhood they never recovered from. Every prison develops its own silent code. Cockatoo Islands was shaped by fear, desperation, and geography. There were no forest edges to hide in, no dark city streets to vanish into, only cliffs and the sea. So the convicts forged new strategies, ways to navigate the island's harsh routines while staying out of trouble. Keeping your head down was essential. Complaining brought consequences. And the guards, hardened men themselves, enforced British discipline with strict routines and unyielding schedules. But the prisoners were not powerless. They built quiet alliances while working in the shipyards, shared information while drawing fresh water from cisterns, and even passed coded messages through the cracks in the sandstone. Some used humor to survive. Others used silence. And a few dreamed of escape. Dreams that the sea, the cliffs, and the relentless watch of the guards made nearly impossible. Nearly. Every island prison has an escape story. Cockatoo Islands is one of Australia's most famous. It was 1863 when a small group of convicts devised a plan that seemed impossible. They spent weeks studying the tides, the guard rotations, and the moonlit patterns on the harbour surface. They crafted a tiny makeshift raft, piece by piece, using scraps of wood they smuggled from a shipyard. When the night finally arrived, fog rolled across the harbour like a curtain, silencing waves and masking shadows. The men lifted their fragile creation and slipped toward the shoreline. They knew the water was cold. They knew the currents were dangerous. But they also knew this island was slowly breaking them. For a moment, freedom seemed within reach. Some say the raft capsized. Others believe at least one man made it across, then vanished into the dense streets of Sydney. To this day, the truth remains a mystery that gives Cockatoo Island one of its most enduring legends. Over the decades, Cockatoo Island changed, but its atmosphere never fully softened. After the prison era, the island became a major shipyard, repairing vessels for both world wars. The sandstone tunnels once used to move prisoners now guided thousands of workers, echoing with the sounds of machinery instead of chains. But the island's past never disappeared. Visitors reported strange feelings when walking through the abandoned barracks. Tourists spoke of cold spots in sunlit rooms, and historians uncovered documents detailing forgotten punishments, lost identities, and stories once buried beneath bureaucratic silence. Cockatoo Island had become a symbol of hardship, resilience, and the hidden chapters of Australia's penal history. Yet, the most surprising transformation was still to come. Today, Cockatoo Island is a tourist destination, a place where families stroll past the same walls that once held men and boys who felt forgotten by the world. Visitors explore tunnels dug by convicts, climb stairways carved from stone, and stand in cells that once defined a life. But even with all its modern attractions, the island still carries an atmosphere, something unspoken, something old. Some say it's the history, others say it's the isolation, and a few believe the island simply remembers. Because when the last ferry leaves and the sun sets behind the cliffs, Cockatoo Island becomes quiet again, almost as if it is waiting for the next person brave enough to walk its paths and listen. Convicts, Cockatoo Island wasn't just a prison, it was the end of a long, harsh road. A road filled with forced labour, severe judgments, and a British justice system that saw transportation as a solution, not just a sentence. But Cockatoo Island was different. Unlike mainland prisons, this one didn't rely on high walls or iron gates. Its greatest defence was the harbour itself. Surrounded by deep channels, unpredictable tides, and warders patrolled day and night, the island formed a natural fortress that needed no moat. Inmates would often joke, bitterly, that if the island didn't stop you, the sea surely would. Every man who arrived here faced the same stark reality. You weren't just separated from society, you were separated from the world. And yet, some still tried. Some still believed that the impossible was worth attempting. Because on Cockatoo Island, the desire for freedom wasn't just a dream, it was an act of rebellion. Walk across Cockatoo Island today, and you'll see sandstone everywhere. There are steps cut cleanly into cliffs, long corridors carved by hand, and building blocks shaped with remarkable precision. But each of these stones has a story, a name, a memory. Convicts worked under the scorching sun and through winter rains, using only the simplest of tools. There were no machines, no advanced techniques, just raw manpower, sheer grit, and orders that allowed for no excuses. If you look closely, you'll find that some stones have faint markings on them, initials, symbols, small carvings that were etched when the guards weren't looking. People used them as reminders that they once existed beyond their chains, tiny rebellions carved directly into the rock. And though centuries have now passed, the sandstone still carries these scars. Some visitors swear they can trace the outlines with their fingertips and feel the immense weight of history pressing back. Because Cockatoo Island may no longer hold prisoners, but the stones remember everything. To truly understand Cockatoo Island's past, you have to understand its routines, strict, punishing, and utterly unforgiving. A typical day for convicts began long before sunrise. A bell would ring, its sound echoing off the iron roofs and sandstone walls. Men had seconds, not minutes, to stand, dress, and fall into line. Breakfast was simple, bread and water. Nothing more. From there, the prisoners were marched to the quarries, the workshops, or the shipyard. Each assignment depended not on skill, but on their perceived obedience. The workday stretched on endlessly, broken only by short, silent moments to eat. Talking was discouraged, and rest was earned only in the rarest of instances. Any sign of resistance was dealt with swiftly by the guards' rigid discipline system, a system designed not just to punish, but to enforce absolute order. By nightfall, the men would return to their cramped quarters, exhausted, drained, and too tired to even think about escape. And that was precisely the point. Cockatoo Island didn't just confine the body, it was designed to confine the spirit. Even during the prison's harshest years, rumours circulated about something unusual happening deep within the island's sandstone tunnels. Convicts spoke quietly about a figure, a man who seemed to appear only during the late-night shifts. They called him the Watcher. Some claimed he was a guard. Others believed he was an escaped convict, hiding in the shadows. There were even stories that he was neither, simply a shadow that moved with intent, always one step ahead, and always unseen when the guards came to investigate. Of course, none of these tales were ever officially recorded. But the fear was genuine. The tunnels were carved by hand, dimly lit, and felt like a labyrinth. Echoes would bounce unpredictably off the walls, making it difficult to know if the footsteps you heard were your own, or someone else's. Today, visitors touring the island say the tunnels still have these moments of eerie silence, as if the air itself is holding its breath. And every now and then, Someone claims to see movement in the corner of their eye. A shape. A shadow. A flicker of something that shouldn't be there. Maybe it's just imagination. Or maybe some mysteries are older than the prison itself. Cockatoo Island wasn't only shaped by the men imprisoned there, it was also shaped by the people who governed it and those who fought to change it. One of the most remarkable, and rarely talked about, figures was a woman named Bessie Guthrie. She was a relentless advocate who came decades after the island's juvenile reformatory had closed. Bessie wasn't a guard, nor was she a former inmate. She was a reformer, someone who believed that the stories of the boys once held on the island needed to be brought into the light. She interviewed families, searched through archives, and compiled accounts of children who had been sent to the island for nothing more than petty theft or homelessness. Her work exposed the failures of an era that treated youth like hardened criminals. Because of her persistence, Cockatoo Island's juvenile history, once overshadowed by the adult convict stories, finally began to be acknowledged. Thanks to her efforts, Australia was forced to confront a difficult part of its past. In a way, she freed the island's forgotten children, not physically, but historically, ensuring their stories would not vanish beneath the waves of time. After the prison officially closed in 1869, Cockatoo Island didn't go quiet. Instead, it transformed into one of Australia's most important shipyards. Large vessels, military ships, and private craft were repaired and constructed here. Thousands of workers replaced the convicts, yet the island's intensity never faded. The clang of hammers, the roar of furnaces, the grinding of metal against metal, the island became a machine, constantly moving, constantly producing. But the shipyard era had its own kind of pressure. There were tight deadlines, dangerous working conditions, and weather that could turn without warning. And beneath it all, the old prison building still stood, silent reminders of the island's previous life. Workers often reported strange sensations, the feeling of being watched, footsteps echoing behind them when no one was there, and cold pockets of air in areas untouched by wind. Most dismissed these experiences as tricks of the mind, symptoms of long, hard work hours. But others wondered whether the island's past wasn't as distant as people wanted to believe. As Cockatoo Island grew, so did its secrets. And one of the most unsettling mysteries involves a set of underground holding cells that were rarely mentioned in any official records. Deep beneath the sandstone workshops, there were chambers, small, windowless, and carved directly into the rock. These were not standard prison cells. They were isolation spaces designed for one purpose: to hold inmates temporarily during transfers, punishments, or unexpected emergencies. But here's the strange part. Some of these cells were never documented in the island's master plans. Years later, when historians began surveying the tunnels, they found narrow door frames sealed shut, with iron latches rusted into place. It became clear that these rooms were once used, but not officially acknowledged. Why would a prison island need secret holding chambers? Were they used for overflow? For safety? Or for something the administrators simply didn't want recorded? No one knows for certain. But the discovery added another layer to the island's already complicated past, a reminder that Cockatoo Island wasn't just a prison. It was a world built on control, silence, and things deliberately left in the dark. Among the thousands of men who passed through Australia's infamous Cockatoo Island, one name continues to echo through history: Fred Ward, better known as Captain Thunderbolt. Before he became one of the country's most famous bushrangers, he was just another inmate, carving stone on this unforgiving island prison. But Fred was different. He studied the tides. He learned the routines of the guards. He listened and he observed. His chance came in 1863. During his time on the island, Fred developed a deep connection with a woman named Marion Bugg, a highly intelligent and resourceful partner who would later play a crucial role in his escape. Using information Marion gathered from the mainland, combined with his own intimate knowledge of the island's rhythms, Fred made a daring move. He slipped into the dark, shark-infested waters surrounding the island. It was a near-suicidal attempt, but against all odds, he made it. That legendary swim not only turned him into a folk hero, but it also exposed the island's biggest vulnerability. If one man could challenge its natural defenses and win, maybe others could too. To this day, Thunderbolt's name hangs in the air around Cockatoo Island, not because he was the most dangerous inmate, but because he was the one who proved that the island, for all its might, wasn't unbeatable. It's easy to picture prison guards as stern figures of authority, but on Cockatoo Island, their lives were often just as difficult as the inmates. Guards lived on the island with their families. Their children played near barracks built by convicts. Their wives cooked meals overlooking a harbour that doubled as a prison moat. This meant guards weren't just enforcing the rules, they were surviving the same profound isolation. Harsh weather battered their living quarters. Supplies often arrived late. Communication with the mainland was slow and unreliable. And a thick, unspoken tension lingered constantly. Any guard walking the sandstone paths knew the inmates outnumbered them. One mistake, one moment of vulnerability, and the fragile order could shatter. So, the guards developed a routine just as rigid as the prisoners. Watchfulness, discipline, preparedness. Even they described nights on Cockatoo Island as too quiet, as if the land itself held secrets no one wanted to disturb. The island didn't just confine the inmates, it trapped the guards in its grip too. To understand why Cockatoo Island even existed, you have to look at the larger, brutal picture, the British convict transportation system. Between the late 1700s and mid-1800s, over 160,000 men, women, and even children were sent to Australia for offences that today would barely earn a fine. Stealing a loaf of bread, taking firewood from a rich man's land, being homeless. Once transported, their lives were changed forever. Cockatoo Island was reserved for the repeat offenders, men who had already been punished but were deemed too difficult or rebellious for other colonial prisons. What made this place different was that the punishment wasn't just confinement. It was the environment itself, the relentless heat, the biting cold, the crushing isolation, the backbreaking labour. Transportation was officially meant to reform convicts. But on Cockatoo Island, it often felt like a way to break them. Yet, against all odds, some survived. Some even rebuilt their lives. And some left behind stories that historians are still uncovering today. Stories hidden in forgotten letters, old ledgers, and dusty archives. Stories of human resilience in a place designed to erase their very identity. Of all the chapters in Cockatoo Island's history, the one about the juvenile reformatory remains one of the most heartbreaking. The boys sent here were not hardened criminals. Some were orphans. Some were runaways from abusive homes. Others had fallen into petty theft simply trying to survive on the streets. But once they arrived on the island, childhood ended abruptly. On paper, the reformatory system tried to enforce structure with school lessons, work shifts, and moral instruction. The reality, however, was far less polished. The boys lived in cramped, confined quarters. They worked long, grueling hours. And discipline was notoriously strict. Some adapted. Some rebelled. And a few formed deep friendships that helped them endure the island's hardness together. Years later, many of these boys grew into men who rarely, if ever, spoke about their time on Cockatoo Island. The memories were simply too heavy, too complicated, and too painful. Their silence left huge gaps in the island story, gaps that modern researchers have only recently begun to fill. Cockatoo Island didn't just shape prisoners. It shaped futures, often in the most tragic ways. For many prisoners, the quarry was the very heart of Cockatoo Island, a massive wound carved into the sandstone where echoes never seemed to die. Day after day, convicts spent countless hours striking the rock face, chipping away at blocks that would later become walls, steps, and iconic buildings all across Sydney Harbour. But the quarry wasn't just a workplace. It was a place where secrets were exchanged in the deafening noise, where quiet friendships were formed in shared hardship, and where men confronted their absolute limits. Every strike of the hammer carried a rhythm that masked whispers, a rhythm that kept guards guessing, a rhythm that gave convicts brief, fleeting slivers of freedom inside their own minds. Some men described the work as hypnotic. Others said it felt like the island's own heartbeat, ceaseless, heavy, and impossible to ignore. And when the sun finally dipped behind the cliffs, the quarry transformed. The shadows deepened. The wind quieted. And the carved walls seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight, as if absorbing centuries of sweat and toil. Today, visitors standing on its edge often describe an unsettling sensation, a feeling like they were being watched by the very past that shaped the island. Not everyone who enforced the rules on Cockatoo Island believed in the system. One overseer, a man named Thomas Ellard, stands out in particular. Ellard was strict but observant, fair but unyielding. He followed orders because it was his duty, but he couldn't ignore the human stories unfolding all around him. He watched young boys trying to learn their way through punishment. He saw adult men struggling to maintain their dignity under the harshest labor conditions. And he privately recorded his observations in a journal, a remarkable document discovered more than a century later. In his entries, Ellard questioned the effectiveness of isolation as a tool for reform. He wrote about convicts who showed incredible intelligence, creativity, and resilience, men who, he believed, might have thrived under a different, more humane system. His writings didn't change the island during his lifetime, but they provide historians with a rare and valuable perspective. A guard who didn't see prisoners as mere numbers but as people caught in a cycle far larger than themselves. Ellard's journal reveals the internal conflict of those who carried authority on paper, but empathy in their hearts. Cockatoo Island's entire existence depended on ferries. Every supply, every guard rotation, every administrative order arrived by water. The harbour was its lifeline. But one night in the late 1800s, a ferry carrying essential provisions simply didn't arrive. The mainland port confirmed that it had left the dock. The harbour patrol reported that sailing conditions were perfectly clear. Yet somewhere between Sydney and the island, the vessel had vanished. For 2 tense days, the island relied on its emergency reserves. Guards rationed food. Inmates were issued reduced portions. A nervous uncertainty spread across the entire settlement. When the missing ferry was finally found, it only deepened the mystery. It was discovered beached on the far side of the harbour, completely intact, with no signs of struggle or damage. The crew members were safe, but couldn't explain what happened. Some claimed they were enveloped by a fog thick enough to swallow the boat whole. Others insisted they heard distant, phantom bells, bells that didn't exist on any nautical map. The incident remained unsolved. And though it didn't involve prisoners or escape attempts, the event added yet another layer to the island's growing reputation as a place where strange things happened, often without any logical explanation. Life on Cockatoo Island wasn't just about surviving hard labour. It was a masterclass in the secret art of survival, a game of psychological chess played every single day. Here, brute force was useless. What mattered was acquired intelligence, an ability to navigate the unseen dangers that lurked in every shadow. Convicts became experts at reading body language, predicting a guard's mood, and knowing exactly when to speak and when to stay silent. They could sense trouble brewing in the air long before it ever arrived. These social skills became a form of currency. One man might be a natural peacemaker, diffusing tensions between rival workgroups. Another might have a knack for fixing tools, earning a bit of goodwill from guards who needed their equipment in working order. And then there were the storytellers, the ones who could weave tales that lifted spirits during the long, dark, and lonely nights. These hidden talents didn't just help individuals survive, they built micro-communities. Within the prison walls designed to isolate and break them, these men created fragile support systems, proving that humanity can persist even in the harshest of circumstances. Long after the prison closed, researchers discovered records of men who said these interpersonal skills didn't just save them on the island, they transformed their futures. For some, Cockatoo Island wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a classroom of resilience. But the convicts weren't the only ones bound to this island. While it was a men's prison, several families lived there too, the families of the guards, the overseers, and the island administrators. The women of Cockatoo Island lived a life of paradox. Their homes were peaceful, yet surrounded by an active prison. Their days were filled with routine chores, yet shadowed by a constant awareness of danger. Their children played in open fields, but always within sight of barred windows. Many of these women kept journals, and their words paint a vivid picture of the island's strange isolation. They wrote about missing the mainland, about watching fierce storms roll across the harbour, and about seeing the lanterns of late-night ferries glowing like distant, unreachable stars. But their diaries weren't just about hardship. They were chronicles of resilience. They documented how they created their own community, sharing food, celebrating holidays, and fighting to bring a sense of normalcy to an environment built on punishment. These women weren't prisoners, not officially, but they too were captive to the island. Their presence created a delicate balance, adding a touch of humanity and hope that subtly softened the island's harsh edges. Today, historians recognize their vital role, a quiet reminder that even in places defined by suffering, life finds a way to continue. By the mid-1800s, the world was changing. New ideas about justice, punishment, and rehabilitation were sweeping across the globe, and Cockatoo Island was caught in the crosscurrents. Reports began to surface, criticizing the appalling living conditions. Humanitarian movements questioned the very idea of imprisoning juvenile offenders in such a brutal place. Slowly but surely, public opinion turned against the extreme isolation of island prisons. Finally, in 1869, the convict establishment on Cockatoo Island was officially closed. Prisoners were transferred, pardoned, or reassigned to other facilities. But even as the last prison ship sailed away, the island didn't breathe a sigh of relief. The closure wasn't a clean break. The imposing sandstone structures remained. The dark, hand-carved tunnels remained. And the memories remained, embedded in every single stone. The end of the prison era was just a transition, one that would lead the island into a new industrial age of shipbuilding. But deep beneath the clutter of new machinery and the bustle of workshops, the island's dark history stayed rooted, waiting for future generations to uncover its stories. Cockatoo Island is so much more than stone and water. It's a living testament to human endurance, struggle, and the will to survive against impossible odds. From young boys shipped across the world, to hardened convicts carving sandstone with their bare hands. From desperate, daring escape attempts to the families who lived quietly in the prison's long shadow. Every corner of this island has a story to tell. Stories of despair and stories of hope. Stories etched into the walls, whispered by the wind, and carried on the tides. Today, visitors walk its paths, explore its tunnels, and look out at the same harbour that once kept so many men captive. But the island's past is never far away. It lingers, waiting for those who are willing to listen closely, to see beyond the weathered stone. Cockatoo Island is a powerful reminder of how fragile our freedom is, and how incredibly strong the human spirit can be. So next time you look across Sydney Harbour and see that small, rugged island, remember the lives it held. Remember the stories it still keeps. And remember that some islands never forgive, but they also never, ever forget.